Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the AEI-MAAS-AUAM Forum on the US 2024 presidential election, the second Trump administration, implications of US foreign economic and security policy for Malaysia, ASEAN, and the Indo-Pacific region. My name is Chin Shi Kei, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for this very important function today. First, may I now call upon the Executive Director of the Asia-Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya, distinguished Professor Dr. Raja Rasya, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Sorry, I'm quite surprised that I'm here to deliver the opening speech because I thought I had already assigned somebody else to do it. Now that I've been called to do it, I shall just say a few words because I really thought being on the panel to speak, I should just pass the baton to somebody else. Well, we all know who's been elected, and that's Donald Trump. I'm not sure whether you had guessed that election. I'm sure some of you were willing him to return, and some of you probably weren't. But whatever it is, he's there now as the incoming president. And then, of course, Biden is now the outgoing president. Now, I think in a forum like this, I think it's timely in the sense that we've been having lots of issues with regards to geopolitical tensions, with regards to not just Malaysia's involvement and what it means to have Donald Trump back, President Trump back, but also what's happening around the world. You would also see from the presentations afterwards, the world has really changed quite considerably. It has changed from the time, say, the US was very much involved in the opening of trade, the development of industries and so on after the Second World War, when General MacArthur took charge of particularly Asia in handling reconstruction of Asia. But it's very different now, and I'm sure you'll hear from the speakers as to what's happening now. And it's also something that's timely and good to hear so that we have an exchange of views, not necessarily views that will tell us what President Trump is going to do, but we could possibly anticipate certain things that he may do and not necessarily everything that he does, because his team is quite different this time. So, by the way, I shall not take more time than this. I just will have to thank you for coming, all of you, not just the distinguished guests that are sitting in front, but every one of you. Let's have a good session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Raja Rasya, for your warm words of welcome. Next, may I now call upon the President of the Malaysian Association for American Studies, MAAS, Professor Dr. K.S. Nathan, Senior Research Fellow at AEI and also the organizing chairman of this forum today, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Shikin. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to see all of you today. I know many of you have important commitments, but have set them aside in order to come and participate in this very interesting forum, in the sense that we've got also a very interesting man who is going to be president again in the White House, and how he charts his foreign policy and the domestic politics, all are open questions, but quite clearly, it is something we need to understand. For that, we also need to really understand the US political system and how it works. You see, the Malaysian Association for American Studies, we do exactly this. We were formed in 1983, so you're talking about 41 years ago. and the objectives of the formation of MAAS as an NGO. Actually, it's a voluntary organization. The objectives were to actually study in greater detail the workings of the American political system, American history, American politics, American culture, economy, sociology, science and technology, America's role in the global political economy, and more importantly, its strategic role in different parts of the world. So MAS, as you know, we have been keeping the organization alive by organizing many workshops, seminars, and conferences. And out of them, we have also produced several publications. And because we are more interested in the academic professional dimension of MAS, so we don't get too involved in either supporting one side or the other. Our aim is to promote and strengthen Malaysian-American cooperation. And of course, this comes about also through knowledge of the other side. We need to study the United States because it is a very important world power. It will remain for a long time to come. And its engagement in this part of the world is something that all of us should be interested in. So ladies and gentlemen, I won't say more about MAS because I myself will be chairing this session. But let me bid you all a very warm welcome. It's good to see all of you, and I'm sure that many more will also be coming in for the seminar, and we hope that we can have a very good dialogue today. So with that, thank you and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Professor Naden, for your warm words of welcome. Last but not least, may I now please invite the President of the American Universities Alumni Association of Malaysia, AUAM, Mr. Ng Yeh Chen, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Very good afternoon to all of you. Can I just have a show of hand? How many of you have actually gone to the US? Have been to the US? Okay. So we have quite a number of you because even though I'm a US grad, I always feel that if you're talking about, I mean, if you have not been there, then you will probably see a very different angle of the US. Yeah, I have friends who have not been to US, and then the moment they landed and stay there for a week, they say, "Hey, Americans are so friendly. It's so different from what I see in TikTok and YouTube." And well, I said, "Yeah, you just have to go there and find out, right?" So we do have a very interesting personality this round elected as the coming US president. But what I would personally see is that there is more than just Trump, right? And he has a team now that we have not seen before. And everybody knows who is Elon Musk, who is John F. Kennedy Jr. So I think maybe the team would have some impact on what he's going to do. And I can't wait for our experts here to share with us their view on the up and coming administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ng, for your warm words of welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my greatest pleasure to invite Professor Dr. K.S. Naden, President of MAAS and Chairperson of this forum, together with the panel members for today. Distinguished Professor Datuk Dr. Raja Rasya, the Executive Director of AEI, Tan Sri Muhammad Jauhar Hassan, Adjunct Professor in AEI, Datuk Siobhan Das, Chief Executive Officer of the American Malaysian Chamber of Commerce AmCham, and Mr. O. A. Son, Council Member of AUAM.
Where shall I sit? Okay, I'll sit there. Okay.
I will now pass the mic. I will now pass the mic to Professor Naden to briefly introduce the speakers and commence the forum, but also a little word that Mr. O. A. Son is actually on the way from the airport and he will join us as soon as he can. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, MC. Yes. See, I think they are all quite prominent people. They don't want any long introductions. I think they're all also well known. So, so let me just say that we have 4 speakers. Mr. O. A. Sun, he will come in a bit later. He is coming from Sabah, but I think he has already arrived in KL, and he will be the last speaker. So the order of speakers will be first Prof. Raja Rasaya. He will speak first and talk about trade policy and how President Trump's foreign policy, especially economic policy and trade policy, will impact Malaysia and also the region. And then we have Dato Shivon. The next one is Tan Sri Jawahar Hassan. Of course, he's a very experienced practitioner of international affairs. He was also former director of ISIS. He needs no introduction. He's known very well, and he will give his perspectives on how Malaysia views the United States and the relationship, the bilateral relationship. What are some of the issues in the bilateral relationship, points of convergence and divergence? So he will speak second. Then Dato Shivon Das, of course, she's the vital link between American business and the Malaysian economy. And she has tremendous experience in dealing with the American multinationals that are present here. And I think she will also give a very enlightening presentation on the subject. Now, when Mr. O. A. Sun comes in, I will introduce him very briefly. So without further ado, I think we'll begin with our director, Professor Dr. Raja Rasaya, well-known economist and trade specialist. And I think he has some very interesting thoughts after the election of President Trump and how Malaysia and the region will be impacted by Trump's policies. Prof, your turn.
Thank you, Professor K.S. Naden. Okay. Since Professor K.S. has actually asked me to write a chapter for his book, which I think he's editing with Dr. Roy. And in that, I think I'm doing the chapter with, of course, the MC today, Chin Shike. I thought I'll start, since I've been thinking about what to do now that I still haven't finished the chapter. The chapter is still evolving. I thought it's good to locate this analysis of mine from the time the world saw the end of the Second World War, because I thought the role of the United States was arguably the most prominent in the way Reconstruction took place. For example, presiding in charge of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, for example, under General MacArthur, you had land reforms, and not just that. And then the subsequent developments, as far as I know, particularly during President Lyndon Johnson's time, I think 63 to 69, then President Nixon, we saw the flourishing, mushrooming of export processing zones. 1965 in Kaohsiung, in Masan Incheon in Korea, and of course Singapore, 1965. Then subsequent developments also meant that the Philippines, Malaysia, and so on began to enjoy export processing zones. We used to call them free trade zones then. But to make that point, at that time, the opening for not just the relocation of particularly American firms. American firms dominated then, which also explains why Malaysia's exports to the US was really dominant in the 70s. until at least, say, the late mid-1980s. But subsequently, many things have actually changed. Among the remains of that era includes Intel. Intel has remained around. I think it came relocated in 74, but many others no longer are here, like Advanced Micro Devices, Fairchild, as well as National Semiconductor. But to make that point, it's important to note that at that time, the role of president, you're talking about Donald Trump, I thought was incisive at that time, including the rapprochement with China, which led to economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping, but really from 1978. Nixon wasn't there at that time, but of course the origin of that repo already took place during his time. But I think the presidents themselves did not really, except for perhaps with Indonesia for a while, show that much of interest with the rest of the countries with regards to trade, although of course their link with Philippines had remained fairly strong. Until I think President Barack Obama came and launched this CPTPP, which no longer exists. And I think some of this might happen again because President Trump revoked it, just like the Paris Accord. Yeah, America still there? No, that's RCEP. You mean the U.S. has continued with just Malaysia? Okay. But I'm talking from the angle of the U.S. Okay. Now, they have now RCEP, which is a Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. There's no U.S. there, as far as I know. And of course, China is there. China wasn't part of the discussion when CPTPP began. Now, what I see is, are we now going to look at that sort of re-emergence? My own feeling is, I see less of it happening, especially so I think President Trump hasn't really shown a real strong interest in ASEAN, for example. But of course, he talks about and likely to see more tariffs on China, containment on China's policy, or blaming any possible outbreak of pandemics to China too. Can we move this? Yeah. I just would like to just focus on this particular topic, which is Malaysian exports to the United States and China in total Malaysian exports. If you look at this figure, you will see that the US dominated still until something like 2009, when China takes over. Now, the US has then, you can see then that slide by the US was somewhat checked, primarily because of the policies that came with geopolitical tensions. And you actually see the relocation of not just Chinese investment, but also other firms within the US relocating in Southeast Asia and exporting straight. That even includes Japan. A lot of the automobile companies, in fact, have been subsidized by the Japanese government to relocate in Southeast Asia. So that at least helps the US come back to exceed 10% of exports from Malaysia. Otherwise, it would have gone further down. But China still remains the chief export market of Malaysia, still remains. That's the 2023 figure. Now, if you look at imports, then of course, compared to the US, China has that much bigger lead. And despite all these containment policies, it hasn't really reversed whatever that we used to export in share terms to the US. But I think what's interesting here is we had recently the US Treasury removing the ringgit from surveillance. Some of them misread what was going on because they have three criteria why they start looking at a currency, screening a currency. One of which is, of course, when you have in a whole year, particularly over 8 months, trade surplus. If in this case, Malaysia having a trade surplus with the US. And the second, that surplus breaches the 3% GDP of that country. The third one, which is the one that led to its removal, whether governments central banks are actively involved in manipulating currencies. When in our case, I know quite clearly that it's from something like, at least from March last year, no evidence of Malaysia getting involved in manipulating currencies. And I think that's why it was because of the third criteria they removed Malaysia from the surveillance. The new countries in there though. Now, this is something that relates to trade balance, which I was mentioning earlier. In this case here, you'll find that Malaysia's trade balance against the US, of course, this is measured by, so that you accentuate the differences, exports minus imports divided by export plus imports. So you see that the Malaysian trade surplus is rising in the case of the US. In the case of China, it's not really rising. In fact, the surplus is enjoyed by China there. But it's not significant in a way where it's massive enough to distort the functions of other aspects of economic growth. Now, what I only wanted to show this, that it's not just China's rise in importance in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, but the whole of ASEAN. From 2006, I think China has become the main importer from ASEAN. And Vietnam used to be up there, and I'm not sure whether it's still the main exporter to China, but they also have countries like Indonesia and so on increasing their exports to China. In fact, from the data that I have, Indonesia's exports to the US has really somewhat declined compared to the Malaysian exports to the US, which is somehow, and in this case here, because of the attempt to circumvent tariffs, you have lots of firms relocating to start exporting there. So my feeling is that in as much as, coming back to the question that Professor K.S. raised just now, he didn't show much interest at that time when he was president of the US, the first term. So I don't see how him, unless of course his friendship with Elon Musk would do anything, because I remember listening to the entire conversation between Malaysia's Prime Minister and him before I was called to speak on Bernama TV. The arrangement to import Tesla cars from Shanghai, they're not assembled here, and to sell them here. He made one assurance that you'll see that the charging facilities will be all over the country. He did not speak about helping national firms in ways that may include building suppliers here, or for that matter, any extensions to component manufacturing, like say lithium battery. But of course, the relationship appeared really cordial when I listened to them speaking. So I'm not sure whether that could lead to more involvement. It may, but I suppose my colleagues here are bigger experts to speak about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Rajarasaya, for your enlightening remarks on this very particular and very interesting aspect of Trump's policies towards Southeast Asia. Now, you mentioned the book earlier, but that was the proceedings of the 2023 conference when Biden was in power. So we basically abandoned that project, and I will think about another book project maybe after President Trump takes office and we get a clearer idea about how US policy is moving under the Trump administration. So it has to be completely revamped. Okay, now we move to our second speaker, Tan Sri Muhammad Jauhar Hassan, who will enlighten us on the Malaysia-US relationship and point out some of the very strong points in the relationship and perhaps some of the irritants also in the relationship. And I think he can do a good job on that. So Tan Sri Jauhar, you can take over.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here and to engage with you. My instruction from Prof. Nathan was to focus essentially on Malaysia-US relations and looking at it particularly from the viewpoint of convergence, where issues where we, or areas where we converge and areas where we diverge. So I'm approaching it from that way. And a lot of the convergence takes place in the economic field, trade, investment field, and that will be Dato' Shimon will elaborate, and Prof. Rajarasya has already introduced. So I just want to put things in perspective. I'm going to talk quite a bit about the divergences, but the most important thing is the convergence. The convergence that Shivon and Prof. Raja and probably Mr. O will also talk about. So I'll speak a little bit less about convergence. But what I consider the most important thing, as far as US-Malaysia relations, it is the convergence that is more important than the lesser divergences, although the divergences, you know, attract attention, get the media thing and TikTok and all that kind of thing. So relations between Malaysia and the United States converge on many strategic areas and diverge on some. And this is regardless of who is the president. Some things are there, you know, they have been there for decades. And I believe it will continue for quite some time. President Trump is going to make some changes, but fundamentally, I think US approach to the region is going to remain about what it has been laid down by recent presidents, especially beginning from Obama. Because there is, you see, even in any country, it's not just the leader, it's the whole system behind the leader, the history, the culture, etc. This is what determines areas where we converge and diverge. And here, a Trump presidency may exacerbate, hopefully improve certain areas, and he will do what he thinks is best from the perspective of what he calls MAGA, Make America Great Again. At home and abroad, that is what will propel him, and we hope for the best. Now, let me look at the insurgents. US-Malaysia convergence. US-Malaysia ties are as old as Malaya when we regained our independence. And then at first, of course, we were closer to the British, and then, of course, US and the West came in. And our relationship, fundamentally, we should never forget, although we may have times when, you know, there's a little bit stresses, fundamentally close, cordial, warm, respectful, and full of understanding. Language is a bridge between, so far at least, between Malaysia and the United States. Many of us speak English. Some of us speak American, but and I think Malaysia owes, as Prof. Rajaraj said, owes US quite a bit, not only bilaterally, but for the region and the global role that US has played. We subscribe to the principles of the United Nations Charter, international law, this is in general, international law, international humanitarian law, many aspects of the so-called liberal international international order, market, economy, trade, etc. We are under this system laid down essentially by the West, the so-called Bretton Woods institutions, which is IMF, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, World Trade Organization. And we are both market economies, and both of us strive for good governance. And Malaysia and the US engage closely and constructively, bilaterally, and in ASEAN-anchored platforms for regional economic and security cooperation. Investment and trade binds the two. US is number 1 or number 2 in investment and trade, the most important to Malaysia, and it binds us together. We always keep this in mind whenever we have some differences. And people-to-people exchanges, it was mentioned, you know, how many of us went to the US and all that. Maybe also how many in US came to Malaysia or to the region. You know, how many in the region go to the US. And of course, education. You know, many of us have been educated. Prof. Raja Rasia and yourself, well, many, yeah? Educated in the US. And Malaysia, like the United States, is a democracy. Now, democracy is a big thing for the United States, and we are lucky we are a democracy. Now, these points of strategic convergence, as I say, far outweigh the rest. And we also bear in mind that the United States, when we deal with the United States is a superpower. You know, it's a real superpower. I divide superpowers in two classes, US class 1 and China and Russia class 2 for the time being as they come closer together. Now, why I say US class 1? Because US is a superpower in the comprehensive sense, in almost every sense, whereas China is more a superpower in the economic sense. The military sense is coming in and probably one day will be closer. Russia is essentially a military superpower, not so much, but the US, military, economic, information, the power of information, which also influences soft power, perceptions, etc., tech, culture, soft power. US soft power is immense. China is catching up, and one day maybe even may overtake, but for the time being, the US is far, far ahead. Many of us here, you know, are very much influenced by US soft power. So I think Malaysia, we bear that in mind at the back of our minds when we deal with the US. The US, of course, can make life very pleasant and comfortable. It can also make life a little bit difficult sometimes. So I don't want to go into details in this respect, but we work very closely with the US in security matters, counterterrorism, training, everything. Yeah. We also are part of the same international organizations. I don't want to go into detail. I think you know. Bilateral trade, Prof. Shoban and Prof. Raja Rasia's thing, it was there, all the figures were there. And so I would like to go now. We have exercises, military exercises, security exercises with the United States. We must always bear this in mind. We have had at least 14 recurrent bilateral and multilateral military exercises with the US, and they are still going on. And the US assists us in various security areas, including in how do we counter terrorism and extremist ideology, how do we contain or help contain WMD expansion, etc. Now, let me go to the divergences. First is the concept of security. How Malaysia perceives security and how the US perceives security. Generally, there is a great overlap, but there is a difference. One, Malaysia views security in the comprehensive sense. It's not just military, physical security, but economic, trade, food, terrorism, piracy, all those things. And this has been there for quite some time. It's not new. For the US, it essentially emphasizes military security. Lately, after the end of the Cold War, it talked about what it calls non-traditional security. So there is traditional security, non-traditional security. For us, it's all the same. For us, what they call non-traditional security is actually very, very traditional. Piracy, as old as Walter Raleigh and Bugis people here, so it's not new at all, not non-traditional at all. But in Singapore, for instance, they have a in ICs or where they have a NTS division and all that, so they follow this thing. But for us, and in ASEAN, if you look at the ASEAN Charter, it talks about comprehensive security. It's so we all in, it's inside there. And this affects how we look, how we respond, and it affects our strategies as well. As far as Malaysia is concerned, the strategy for promoting international peace and security and bilateral peace and security, we emphasize more on inclusive regional, bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperation. We are blind to differences in political ideology. You may be so-called socialist system or communist system, you may not be a democracy. It does not matter. We have to work together. And sometimes, especially when our political systems are different, we have to work together even more because we have to bridge the gap. So for us, we are blind to political differences. And this shows, for instance, not only in our bilateral relations, but also in ASEAN. In ASEAN, for instance, with democracies, we also have countries that are not democratic. But that's no problem for us. We work closely together. We must, for common good. And then we have ARF, where everybody is there. Russia, China, you name them. North Korea is also there. And we also have ZOPFAN, Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality. For us, when we approach security, because security is comprehensive, it's not just military, it's economic and food security and all that, we have to work with people. And so we don't want to take sides, because when you take sides, then you hurt certain aspects of security. So neutrality is quite important to us, including in the military sense. Now, US, on the other hand, as I said, looks at, actually, the US also has this comprehensive security in mind, but when it talks security, it usually talks military security. And it privileges military in Southeast Asia, in not so much Southeast Asia, Asia-Pacific region. In fact, all over the world, it privileges military alliances. It has military alliances all over the world. NATO is, of course, prominent. And in Asia-Pacific region, you have all the bilateral alliances, and lately we have other additions as well. I'll come to that later. So it privileges military alliances, it privileges the military instrument, and because it has this kind of approach, very often it is us versus them, or us versus you. And this catchphrase, either you are with us or you're against us. So it follows when you adopt this kind of security approach. Now, as I said, we have more alliances, we have trilaterals, South Korea, very recent, South Korea, Japan, US, and South Korea, Japan, traditionally, they don't get along. And then we have Quad, AUKUS, extension of NATO, and then military bases all over the world. And for the US, unlike for Malaysia and for many countries in this region, democracy is a very, very important and strategic value. Many of its alliances especially are based on these things. For instance, NATO and Japan with South Korea, etc. Now I think I'll go ahead. But in practice, of course, I think we must bear in mind that it is not always democracy. US works with ASEAN. Half of ASEAN is not democratic. US works also closely with, for instance, Vietnam, countries like that. They are not democratic in our sense. It's not negative. I'm not using it in a negative sense. I'm using it in a very neutral sense. And then the US works with absolute monarchies, zero democracy in the Middle East. So while it emphasizes democracy all the time, it also works with non-democracies. Now, the second point I want to make about divergences between Malaysia and the US is our response a result of our response to the shift in the geopolitical balance of power. From a balance of power which favored the US, primacy of the US and the West, to a more multipolar structure. Malaysia is adjusting to this. The US, quite understandably, is trying to retain its primacy. And because it retains its primacy, it has to do certain things. I mean, this is natural. For any country, it will do that. And it started how it's retaining its primacy. It started with, of course, I'm putting it very simply, pivot to Asia. Obama's pivot to Asia, which is, of course, directed at China. Pivot to Asia, and then recasting the region as Indo-Pacific instead of Asia-Pacific. Oh, 15. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I didn't know. So let me rush through. I'm sure you all want me to continue, right? Yes. Okay. So, but Malaysia has to adapt and leverage to this thing. So we are joining certain things like what do we call that? The South one, Global South, and I'll come to that. The other organizations, BRICS, Global South. Malaysia is becoming part of that. So there is some call it hedging. I don't like that word, but that's what they use. Part of the reason why we join these things is because we want to reduce the risk of sanctions, both particularly unitary or unilateral and secondary sanctions imposed by the US. US does this. It use trade sanctions, etc. It use the SWIFT system. Yeah, because we use the US dollar, therefore we are at, we're subject to this kind of thing. So Malaysia is trying to reduce this kind of thing. It's not just Malaysia. Many countries are doing this. Now, so far as China policy is concerned, we differ, of course, very, very markedly. China is our neighbor. We are neighbors. China is a giant neighbor. And we have worked with China throughout our history. It's not new. We continue to work with China. Now, I think I want to cut this out. And it's very important, trade and investment, almost as important, and in so far as trade is concerned, more important than the US. Investment, a bit less than the US, but catching up. And as far as the United States is concerned, of course, China is the greatest challenge to its primacy, and the US is reacting accordingly. And then we have Taiwan in the South China Sea, Palestine and Israel. If we want to discuss that later, I can discuss it. And then North Korea, etc. We have two flashpoints, South China Sea and Taiwan Straits. Also, we can discuss. I'd rather end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri, for that very comprehensive coverage. From your presentation, it is clear you're looking also at the very institutionalized aspects of bilateral relations. Yeah, if you just remove the personalities and look at context, I think Tan Sri is absolutely right. There are many, many points of convergence between the United States and Malaysia, and there is every reason why these two countries should be working together now and in the future. Both actually are indispensable partners. The United States clearly finds ASEAN as a very important partner, despite President Trump's perhaps detraction. He may have other interests, but still, Trump is only one person. There's the entire US bureaucracy, the economic bureaucracy, the political bureaucracy, the foreign policy bureaucracy. All these things also will pull Trump more to the center, and he cannot derail many of the institutionalized relations. So I think you're right on that score, Tan Sri. And of course, as usual, between two countries, there will be differences from time to time. And I think you have pointed them out, and perhaps during the Q&A, we can discuss that further. Okay, now we can move to our third speaker, the Chief Executive Officer of the American-Malaysian Chamber of Commerce. As I said, it's a very vital link between American multinationals business and the Malaysian economy. And Dato Shibon Das has been actually heading the organization for some time, and so she has tremendous experience which she can share with us today. Okay, Dato.
Thank you very much, Prof. Nathan. And thank you very much for having AmCham here. I feel extremely humbled sitting with the academicians here, and the fact that I cannot argue these numbers because I don't have the economic background for it. So please bear with me. I also just want to say that the American Chamber, people don't realize the American Chamber is an independent organization, and we represent U.S. businesses on the ground. We are very separate from the U.S. government, and so people sometimes kind of confuse that. I do not speak on behalf of the government. I'm not an economist, and what I've tried to put together here is just a snapshot of the really complex relationship, especially how it relates to investments and how businesses need to be looking at what the changes are coming forth. And a lot of it has to do with perception. Because when you make investments, a lot of it is how comfortable do I feel, how confident do I feel in the country. And you've just heard both Prof and Chansri say there is a strong relationship with the United States, and something we need to really put that filter in when you listen to all the stuff that we're talking about. People talk about it. The fundamental strength is there, the foundations are there, and we need to find ways to navigate through this. So, welcome. And so anyway, let me start with the first slide here. It's all about location. Okay, we have to remember why we're important to the United States. First of all, we sit in the middle of the Indo-Pacific. We're home to the 65% of the world's population and a very large segment of the GDP. So this area is important. We also have the ASEAN. We're part of ASEAN and the Southeast Asian nations. And again, this is a very, very significant part of where trade is moving towards. So we have to understand where we are. It's all about location, just like everything else in the world, including where you decide to live in your house. Location, location, location. And where you want to go shop or place a shop. Well, the other thing is that in Malaysia, we're tiny in comparison, okay? When you put it into context, we're minuscule. But from day one, I think when I took this role, I always emphasized that Malaysia is a very small cog in a very important machinery. But that small cog plays a really important role. And that's what I think that the two gentlemen before me have tried to explain as well. It's where we converge and where we can be together. From the Malaysian perspective, these numbers, I've tried to put as much as the most modern, the most recent numbers. It's been quite hard to find the more recent numbers, so just bear with me. Some of these may be slightly off, but the trend is there because it's hard to gather this data to make it real and today. So from the Malaysian perspective, we're doing really well. You know, our exports to the United States, we are a significant trade partner, especially in the high-end technology space, whether it's electronics, machinery. This is very, very kind of the low-end commodities just are still there because that's not the history of what we were. But we've moved up the value chain and we're doing a lot of high-end exports. And also, by doing so, we're also importing from the United States machinery, electrical equipment to enable this growth. So we're seeing a very healthy trading relationships. And from the Malaysian perspective, we have a trade surplus. And I just want my presentation has here the two perspectives from what we are seeing, and that's a really healthy place, that we have a trade surplus. Almost every country in Asia has a trade surplus to the United States. Okay, so that's how we look at the life. So we just have to remember this is the space that we're working in. Now this is older data too, so it's moved significantly since COVID. But what does the future hold? So we've got geopolitics that we've just touched upon, everything from what the redefining of the region to the Indo-Pacific, the role of ASEAN, the activities in South China Sea playing out, the US-China tensions, the emergence of the BRICS mnemonic here, stuff happening in the tensions in Gaza and Palestine, what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine, and now the entrance of North Korea, which is unusual, to suddenly be part of the geopolitical world outside of their borders. We also have shifting supply chains in our economic landscape. We have also this emerging state-driven versus market-driven trade that's also emerging. And if you just remember what Tan Sri said, since Bretton Woods, it's always been market-driven. So, but this is something that's emerging to be a little bit more state-driven. This includes the United States as well. We also have the emergence of the digital economy and what the impact of that is going to be on AI, with AI kind of invading our lives and how we're adjusting to it. We also have a democratic shift as well. You know, as the Industrial Revolution took the grips of Europe and into the United States, we saw the demographic power shift towards the West, but it's also now shifting back towards the East by sheer volume. But what does that mean about talent, what's available, and what is mobility? What does talent mobility mean? And more locally, what does skills development mean for all of us? And you know, what are we in the universities doing about making sure that the people we have within our borders are prepared for all the above? And of course, we have our leaders. These are some of the three just pictures that I wanted to grab out there, and these are the people that are influencing us, especially in the new 2025 presidency. So, where is Malaysia's strategic role in ASEAN and global alliances? Well, strategically positioned, we've got a lot of stuff happening, especially within balancing the ties economically, as well as what you talked about, Tan Sri, the security partnerships. Security is, I think the US is also learning that it's not just a militaristic partnership, that it's also a more comprehensive partnership that it needs to develop. And I think that's what the Indo-Pacific, the shift towards the Indo-Pacific vernacular is trying to do. And what we've seen with IPEF and what IPEF has been trying to uncover is how do we work beyond just the traditional way of working. We need to be able to uphold sovereignty in this region. As Malaysia, we want to be able to hold on to our sovereignty, but also we want to have regional stability. And I think even the United States wants to see regional stability for all the reasons that we've enjoyed, 80 plus years, almost, 100 years of peace, relative peace. But we also, as a country, want to make sure that Malaysia sits in a regional and global hub and play that role of being a cog in the wheel of the world. In order to do this, we have to have regional cooperation, which is why we've got the collective approach that we've described earlier on ASEAN's kind of working with everybody, no matter what your background is. But we also rely on a rules-based order. And that aligns with US's desire for stability, but it also faces challenges from the differing members' interests. Now, this is cutting across all states, okay? But the key focus, I think, here is maritime security, economic integration, and now the impact of climate change, which has no borders. And I think that's something we're all having to tackle with. It completely defies traditional ways of thinking. Climate impacts all of us, and it's going to impact in a different way, and each one in a different way. And of course, we've seen what the impact of COVID has done. It's made us really focus on what resilience means and what supply chains need to be, and beyond just pandemics, but what it means to make sure that businesses can support the economic integration of globalization. And we're not, I mean, people say globalization is dead. We are already globalized. It might retreat a little bit, but we are essentially a globalized nation. We cannot produce everything in our own country. And as a small trading nation, globalization is alive and well for us. So the question is what role can we play in that space? And economic integration, we're on the cusp of the new ASEAN chairmanship. We need to be talking about harmonization. We need to be talking about how do we work well together? How do we integrate better? And a lot of that is about making sure the rules that we're playing with can be integrated with each other so that we can actually drive growth and participate in that inter-ASEAN trade and make sure that for the United States perspective, that we are a platform for their growth as much as it is a platform for Chinese growth and every other economic power that is here. How do we as Malaysians benefit from being that platform? And of course, that requires strengthening the alliances and understanding the concerns of each country that are in that region. So there's a lot happening, a lot to unpack there. And we certainly don't have time in today's world, but today's on the stage today, but we'll look forward to the conversation there. Increased economic competition. China is present. It's our neighbor, and we have to be able to work with China. From the US perspective, the US is in China. It has businesses that are in China. And so the decoupling, it would like to see some decoupling, but the reality, it can never totally, realistically totally decouple. It's going to find its way. And right now the rhetoric is very much what does that look like? And I think with the Trump presidency, we're going to see it slightly more forceful, maybe initially. But again, as Prof. Nathan said, there's lots of checks and balances. You cannot just automatically make arbitrary changes overnight. So I think we're going to have to wait and see on some of what that's going to look like. But nonetheless, we have that competition. We also understand that with the Chinese presence in Asia, their contribution with the Belt and Road initiatives have given some countries a lot of infrastructure and supported that. They exist. So how do we work with that? And but however, with a caution, what is the over-reliance of Chinese capital impacting some of the Asian countries? So this is all kind of the ground, the base that we're working from. Trade relations. China is Malaysia's largest trading partner. However, that's shifting as well. In 2024 alone, the US has become Malaysia's second largest export market after Singapore. This is a recent shift and something we need to be watching to try and understand what's happening here. We've got the slowing down of the Chinese economy. For how long, we don't know, but these are shifts, and what does that shift mean? And the trade with the United States is in higher valued goods. So again, what does this mean? ASEAN 2025 is the opportunity, and the United States initiatives like the IPEF framework has developed. People can, a lot of the times people have kind of dismissed the IPEF efforts, but I'm just, my statement when I first started, and the statement is true today, the IPEF is actually an incredibly strong arrangement. And it was a success from the beginning because it brought 14 nations together over 18 months, literally speaking to each other every month, almost every day. Just that coordination made 14 economies much more comfortable with each other. And just in that conversation, you have strength and that ability to rely on each other, to understand what their pain points are, and to understand each other's strengths. So the IPEF, while yes, maybe you can dismiss parts of it, just remember what it gave you, which was the ability to talk to each other. So I want to go back to what we had the Malaysia's perspective of the trade surplus. Well, U.S. trade between U.S. and Malaysia is growing, and it's increased by 8% in 2024. It exports are at the high end in aircraft, machinery, chemicals, and imports from Malaysia also in that higher end value system. Trade with the ASEAN in perspective, from the US perspective, okay, this is where it's going to get really tricky, because this is how Trump is looking at it, and the Trump administration is going to look at it. We are at a trade deficit. And the China's trade deficit, it's in over 380 billion. Okay, US for the Malaysia is around 20. I need to, it's a moving target, this figure. So I'm going to say stick with the 20 billion. But this is something that we need to understand. We are going to be in the crosshairs of China and of the US because of the trade deficit. We were, when he first had Trump 1.0, we're going to be in that space, but question is, how do we balance that out? And how can we actually make sure that as a Malaysian trading nation, that we are not too adversely impacted, and tariffs is going to hit us. So some of those economic challenges that we're going to have is going to play out on the China plus one relationship. The China plus one is not just on tariffs, but it's also on investments. So where China is in our economy is going to be how the Trump administration is going to look to see whether or not it wants to impose more tariffs on that ecosystem. So we have lots to look for. We've got economic growth in semiconductors. We've got a really interesting play in the energy sector. And we've also got tech expansion here. FDI is pouring into Malaysia from the US right now. And the question, it doesn't come because it doesn't want to be here. It wants to be here. And don't forget, Malaysia does not have a FTA, does not have a free trade agreement with the United States. So everything that is in Malaysia has been built brick by businesses. And that speaks volumes as to the strength of the relationship. This China plus one strategy, US companies here in Malaysia are going to be increasingly looking to see to Malaysia to have an alternate for where they could be placing their supply chain. And Malaysia has proven to be a good trusted partner. And so therefore you're seeing that FDI come into Malaysia. It's also, again, in that high end. So as the US kind of tightens its control on what's in China, Malaysia will benefit. The question is, Chinese companies are also coming here. What is that going to impact? How is that going to impact on how US views Malaysia? Trade agreements, there's tariff-free access to ASEAN. We also have RCEP, which provides tariff-free access for Malaysia for goods from China, which is one of the reasons why you're seeing a lot of oversupply. There's a lot of excess in the Chinese economy, and that's coming into Malaysia tariff-free. So again, Malaysia is benefiting from that, but it also runs a risk as well. But this is also an opportunity for Malaysian SMEs to grow as the FDI is pouring in. Is what can we grow and what can we offer to the trading opportunity? So I'm just going to skip a little bit forward to what do we need to do, which is to build some of the resilience that we have in the sectors that we're working in, and really focus on what is it that US businesses are looking for. And US businesses are looking for alignment in policies so that we can make sure that the US can rely on Malaysia as a trusted partner. We're looking for innovation, that it can place innovation in Malaysia or in the parts of Southeast Asia and have true partnerships and transfer of technology safely. And it's also looking to strengthen its base of operations in the region. So right now, the Philippines is riding high on where the US is looking. Vietnam is getting a lot of FDI, but Vietnam is stalling. I'm hearing from our members that there's trouble in some of the in operating in Vietnam right now. So a lot of it, the spillover is coming into Malaysia, and Malaysia is ready now. So I am going to skip ahead because I know I'm running out of time for Sanathan. What do we know? We know that the Trump presidency in 2025 to 2028 is going to be different. It's going to be better prepared. It's going to move faster. It's going to be China focused, but Southeast Asia has its deficits too. So we need to make sure we understand what those deficits, how those deficits are going to play out, and whether or not we can maybe avoid the first tranche of impact, and whether the businesses here can showcase to the United States the importance of Malaysia in its supply chain, and how do we build that trusted relationship. And Trump is a transactional guy. We know this from 1.0. So what is it that we have to, what is it he's looking for? What is that administration looking for? And see whether or not that's something we can offer or not offer. And that's up to what Malaysia wants to do. I think the neutrality, the neutrality is important, but ultimately when you have a customer that's based in the United States, if you have a customer that's based in the United States, you're going to have to obey with the American rules of how you want to play and operate in that trading supply chain. Hopefully, maybe down the road, China and the United States may come to a very comfortable relationship. We don't know. This is a bit of an unknown. So, you know, we can only look in the tea leaves so much, but we don't know what's going to be on the other side. So I just want to kind of skip to the end here. Charting Malaysia's path in the US political changes. We need to build Southeast Asia's strength narratives. Why is the Southeast Asian nations and why is Malaysia strong? Why does Malaysia matter in global trade? We need to be able to express this, and express this better than we are doing it today. Malaysia tends to be skipped over. If you look for every time that Malaysia is mentioned, Vietnam is mentioned probably 20 more times. If you have time, maybe even Thailand 10 times. So how do we strengthen Malaysia's offering? How do we actually talk about Malaysia and what we actually deliver? And if we can articulate that to the policymakers in the United States as well as in the region, this is something that we'll play to our strengths, because most people skip over Malaysia yet don't understand how strong that relationship is. So what do we need to be able to express? Malaysia's trusted trading partner status, as also the fact that we are a leader in the region. And this is something that we really need to be able to express. US businesses are here, FDI is coming in. US businesses in Malaysia are run by Malaysians. I always tell the government, when you think about and talk to AmCham, just remember we're talking to Malaysians running US companies. That's a very important distinction, because you're hearing from Malaysians about why they enjoy the security, the relationship, the camaraderie of that relationship. It's been built, again, brick by brick because of that relationship. But what do we need to watch? We need to watch the Trump nominees. We don't know. These are wild cards. Already, but this chart is completely out of date. I think maybe at least 50%, or maybe, I don't know, maybe 30% is out of date. I think we need to be able to watch this. They're moving pieces. Let's see how the Senate hearings and Senate conversations go. But this is the unknown. So we don't know what's gonna happen here. And use today's opportunity of ASEAN. We've got an opportunity as chair to bring those voices together, express what we have, and showcase what Malaysia can do and what US businesses can do and have done over the decades here, and how do we strengthen that relationship. We can do this. We've got the opportunity, and it's in the next 12 months that we can showcase. So with that, I would just like to say thank you very much for having me, and the opportunity is ours. US investments is already here. The question is, how much more can we grow, and how do we do this together?
Yeah, thank you, Siobhan. That was really excellent. It's really useful to look at the glass as half full rather than half empty. Very clearly, there are economic challenges and there are also economic opportunities. So it depends on what we want to focus on. In terms of the security dimension, it's quite clear we will be needing the US around. The US is going to be around. It's an important security provider. But there is also the economic dimension of the US. It's just not only China providing the economic dimension, but it's up to us how we leverage these dimensions and how we manage this trilateral relationship. And that is Malaysia, China, United States. And it is up to us. We as leaders in Malaysia, the leadership has to conceptualize new paradigms to cope with new changes and also be prepared for a new administration in the US. Never be caught unprepared. It's always good to prepare and be ready as to how Trump's economic foreign policy will unfold in the region, and how we can actually navigate any of the difficulties that may arise and keep the relationship really open and keep it always positive in the way that Tan Sri Muhammad Johar has also said, yeah, really, there are many, many things that we can do with the United States, but we need to keep in mind the relationship between Malaysia and the US is not about some fighting here and there, some issue here and there. You really have to look at this in a very broad context, and the history of the relationship also matters, because this is what is sustaining the relationship despite some strains that may arise from now and then. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shimon. Okay, now we move to our fourth speaker. I'm glad your plane brought you back on time, Mr. O.A. Sun. Now, he's basically a geostrategist, political commentator, but he's also very well qualified. He holds all his degrees from the University of Davis. He has done Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts, a Juris Doctor, Law and Policy, Master of Science in Engineering, Master of Business Administration. So he's quite a bit of a jack of all trades. So it depends now how you will focus your understanding of the Malaysia-American relationship and how, as you suggest in your abstract, how this relationship can be nurtured under Trump 2.0. Yeah. Mr. O.A. Sun.
Thank you, Professor Nathan. A very good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for being late to this forum, as I was rushing from the airport, having flown from Sabah, from Kota Kinabalu. So the title of my presentation will be Still Water Runs Deep. Even though on the surface you don't see perhaps very conspicuous activities in terms of US-Malaysian interactions, but underneath there are actually very strong currents that are propelling the relationship, the bilateral relationship between the United States and Malaysia. I think for the new US administration, and indeed for the Malaysian government and also the Malaysian society, the US-Malaysia relations indeed presents various challenges and opportunities. And that is because both countries' geopolitical, security, and economic interests, sometimes they converge and sometimes they diverge in turn. For example, although the bilateral relations between US and Malaysia have generally been very cordial and stable, hence still water, in the recent context of US-China global contestation, it would appear that Malaysia does attempt to maintain some form of very delicate balance between the United States and China being a major economic partner and regional power for Southeast Asia in general and Malaysia specifically. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I just came from moderating a ministerial forum this morning in the China-Sabah Trade Expo organized by the Sabah state government. And frankly speaking, that is how important not only the federal government, but even individual state governments in Malaysia, they view that kind of trade and investments relations with China. And I hope the same could be done for the United States as well. The United States faces challenges in securing Malaysia's undiluted support on some critical issues, such as the South China Sea disputes and in general regional security, given Malaysia's non-aligned stance. And this is despite Malaysia being one of the South China Sea disputants. Even though sometimes we have run-ins with various naval vessels or maritime enforcement vessels of China, but we're very rare do we sort of magnify these issues, because whether we like it or not, the biggest trading partner for Malaysia is China. So sometimes it's very difficult for the United States to persuade South China Sea disputant, such as Malaysia, to perhaps adopt a more proactive, a more prominent attitude when it comes to sometimes confrontation on the high seas with China or Chinese vessels. Relatedly, I think the U.S.-China technological competition affects Malaysia as well, because Malaysia is a significant player in the semiconductor and electronics industries. As the United States attempts to restrict China's access to advanced technology, Malaysia faces pressures on which side to align with in terms of supply chain partnerships and digital infrastructure choices. If I remember correctly, the MITI Minister, Minister International Trade and Industry, Tengku Zafrud, said something to that effect recently, that Malaysia is facing a lot of pressure. Well, in essence, the implication being to choose side. But of course, he did not explicitly mention the pressure came from which power. And while Malaysia benefits tremendously from trade in goods and services with the United States, Malaysia remains economically dependent on China, as I mentioned, and other regional markets. So encouraging economic diversification that reduces Malaysia's reliance on any single country remains a challenge for the United States as well, especially if the United States, as perhaps we are expecting, the United States itself, if it regresses into another bout of protectionism, then it'll be very difficult to persuade an export economy such as Malaysia to diversify away from its dependence on China. Moreover, in the past, US-Malaysia relations have occasionally been strained by human rights and democratic governance issues in Malaysia, including such issues as restrictions on media freedom, freedom of assembly, and so forth, despite frequent changes of government in Malaysia in recent years. Such issues can, of course, complicate diplomatic relations, especially when the US administration is one that often emphasizes human rights in its foreign policy. But I think with this incoming administration, we probably don't have to worry about that for the next 4 years, because human rights, promotion of democracy may or may not be high on the agenda of the incoming administration. I'm trying to be polite here. I think it should also be noted by the new American administration that Malaysia's domestic politics are also influenced by its increasingly conservative electorate and religiously oriented political movements. The United States must navigate these Malaysian internal dynamics very carefully, especially when it comes to policies with respect to the Middle East, with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for example. This is to avoid alienating Malaysia or inciting significant Malaysian domestic opposition against the United States. But despite these concerns, the incoming American administration should appreciate that the United States and Malaysia do have very strong economic ties, as I think our previous speakers have mentioned abundantly. Malaysia is a major trading partner for the United States, with significant exports to the US in electronics, in machinery, and in commodities. Expanding these ties can benefit both countries, particularly in high-tech industries such as semiconductors and perhaps renewable energy. And these developments take place as Malaysia is pushing forwards its own digital economy, and it offers growth potential in e-commerce, in artificial intelligence, and in fintech. So collaboration between the United States and Malaysia in technology, in cybersecurity, and in innovation offers substantial opportunities for both the United States and Malaysia to strengthen mutual investments and sharing our expertise. More broadly speaking, Malaysia is, of course, a key member and one of the founders of ASEAN. And ASEAN being a region, well, of strategic importance for US interests, for American interests. As the United States seeks to counterbalance China's influence, Malaysia's alignment within ASEAN presents opportunity for the United States to deepen cooperation on regional security and economic issues. I have to mention, of course, that on social cultural level, me being from the American Alumni Association, the United States is a popular destination for Malaysian students. While Malaysia is expanding its international educational sector as well. Building on these educational ties, alumni ties, can strengthen people-to-people connections and promote long-term collaborations. Now, I actually have a paragraph here on biodiversity and climate change and sustainable development and so forth. But again, I think with this incoming administration, perhaps those issues are not on top of the agenda, so I skip that paragraph. So I think my two main takeaway points here are, number one, I think the incoming administration would present an economically challenging time for Southeast Asia because of potentially high tariffs for imports into the United States, which are of course exports from Southeast Asia. And also, I'm keenly aware MCHAM Datu is here, but I think the Trump administration, they would also, for example, lower domestic income taxes for both individuals and corporations. They would loosen environmental regulations. They would perhaps not insist so highly upon, let's say, labor, welfare, and so forth. And that would prove quite attractive for a number of companies. Number one, to repatriate to the United States, and even for foreign companies to in a sense, at least set up a branch, if not relocate to the United States. So I remember when I was a student in California, there was a presidential candidate in 1992 with the name of, if I remember correctly, Ross Perot. He talked about, at that time, there was this, the US, Canada, and Mexico trying to sign the North American Free Trade Agreement. And Ross Perot was of the opinion that Mexico will be a giant sucking sound, sucking out all American industry and so on. I think with the Trump administration coming into power, there could be a reverse giant sucking sound. I think America would attract a lot of investments into the United States, in addition to repatriating some of its foreign investments. So it'll be a very economically challenging time for Southeast Asia. But the salient point, I think, is for those of us who are more interested in geopolitical interactions and so forth, I think geopolitically, it would actually lighten Southeast Asia's burden. President Trump is perhaps not one who is very keen on building encircling alliances around China, for example. Under President Trump, I think unilateralism would be more the vogue rather than multilateralism. So conversely speaking, and ironically speaking, I think that kind of pressure for us to choose side strategically, geopolitically between the United States on the one hand and China on the other hand, I think that sort of burden would lighten a lot. So ironically, so geopolitically, the burden will lighten a lot. Economically, it could be a challenging time. So enhancing the US-Malaysia relationship will require both countries to very carefully navigate some of these challenges and capitalizing on opportunities, perhaps in trade, hopefully, in technology, in regional security, and of course in education. I actually put down here environmental sustainability, but again, I think I don't need to mention that. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ho. There are some very important points that you have made. Again, it is still the onus on the individual country how we deal with this geostrategic changes, and also the region itself, how ASEAN also as a group navigates all these challenges and prepares itself to deal with the rest of the world as a geopolitical unit. So we have now come to the Q&A session. And so I will be opening the floor very shortly. Please do keep your comments and questions very brief, and also please identify yourself so that we can have as much interaction as possible. So can we start with the first question or comment? Taufik, you put up your hand. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Taufik. I am a student at AEI. Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, so I have two questions to be given to anyone at the panel. The first question is, what do you think the role Mexico will be playing in this incoming Trump administration, especially when China has already started using Mexico as a destination to evade tariffs to enter the US market? Will we be seeing the rest of ASEAN follow suit as well as this administration come? And secondly, you look at the list of administration nominees, the likes of Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, and Mike Waltz have shown willingness to support Israel's expansion of the war to even Iran in response to the ICC ruling yesterday. And that might lead to another oil crisis for the first time in 4 decades. What should Malaysia and the rest of Asia Pacific respond with this threat?
We can possibly take another 1 or 2 questions, and then after 3 questions, we can provide the opportunity for the panelists. Dr. Roy, yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof. Nathan, and to all the panelists. Two questions, very quick. What do you think of Trump's 2.0 administration's policy towards the policies of his predecessors, like and also the Indo-Pacific strategy? As you know, in Trump 1.0, some of the Obama policies, such as YCD, was downplayed. So will this new administration of Trump downplay some of the policies of his predecessor, like the Indo-Pacific strategy, or come up with something new to replace that? One. Number two, how would Trump 2.0's approach to ASEAN? Because it appears in 1.0, he didn't give much attention to ASEAN. In fact, he skipped several ASEAN summits. So what do the esteemed panelists think about it? Thank you very much.
All right, the question is actually comparative between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. How much continuity, how much change? Yeah. Okay, and then one more question or comment before we ask our panelists to respond. Yes, over there, yeah.
My question is
Your name, please.
Chandrasekharan. My question is in relation to the relationship between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. It appears that Elon Musk, it appears that he has a fairly strong influence on Trump, and this could therefore affect some of his policies, which could be quite different from the Trump of the past. Knowing the fact that Elon Musk is a big investor in China and maintains very strong relationship and business relationship in China. I'd like the panel to comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully, the relationship between Trump and Elon Musk is not one between Tweedledum and Tweedledee. We hope so. Okay, now we open it up to our panelists. Maybe Prof. Raja has some comments.
Given that we have so many questions, let me go selectively. It is true that the Tesla cars that come here from Elon Musk's company, they actually come from Shanghai. And it's also true that all the way China's incentives are allocated, you have some coming from the central government, then the provincial. In the case of Shanghai being a city-state, it doesn't have that provincial element that, say, Shandong or Guangdong might have. But it has also city incentives. So whatever incentives that Tesla has got is no inferior to whatever incentives Chinese firms have got there. That's one thing. The science minister then, Wang Gang, 1995, he was from Audi. He decided that in order to stimulate spillover in the best possible way, that all of them given the same treatment. So we don't have national preferences such there. And those cars actually come here. And it might mean, I think you make a point. You make a point that since he's given emphasis on listening to of course, Elon Musk, that could mean that there could be changes. Now, whether it'll have an impact on ASEAN, whether it'll have an impact on Malaysia, I'm not, at the moment, I'm still reluctant to feel that Trump will show that much more interest. What looks quite obvious to me is there's an attempt. It may happen. It manifests itself because Trump did make this position, took this position. He was criticizing Biden, who is the outgoing president. He said that we are now on the brink of a nuclear war, all because of what Biden had done, and because he allowed Zelensky to fly this missile into Russia. He was making this point. He said, in a nuclear war, we will all be destroyed. It sounded somewhat quite incisive. He said the first thing he'll do is to prevent those things, instead of seeing the whole world being destroyed. That suggests that some people have a tendency to think that he's not very intelligent. I never thought that that was the case. So my own feeling is the changes is demonstrating. One of the things I've seen in him is to undo or take positions opposite of what the predecessors did. He very often took positions against Obama. We all know that. So obviously that would be one of his stance. But that's a good stance, though, in the sense that if you are serious in believing a nuclear war, in fact, I think there's an understatement that China's technology is not superior enough. I must say that because I work on technology. China is already up there. And China has also now restricted exports of a number of rare minerals like gallium. gallium is, China produces something like 60%, 80% of it they are in control. And gallium is key to even your Android phones because the radio frequency is more important than semiconductors that go to computers and so on. They're passive in some ways. So my own feeling is technologically and economically, China is there for me. It's not, I would not relegate China in the number 2 class as such. Now, speaking about that, one important person may make a difference. I don't know, but the statement by Trump gives us the feeling that he might make some very important decisions that's good for the world. That might even undo, and I don't disagree with Mr. Wu, who was simply because after Obama he revoked America's position on. Obama had actually ratified the Paris Accord, but also the second thing you must understand with the U.S., like the EU, European Monetary Union, fiscal policy is in the hands of the individual countries in Europe, and it's in the hands of the states in the U.S. So when we talk about huge tax deductions and a whole range of things, as far as the environment is concerned, throughout the Trump first administration, California was very well looked after by the governor there. So one needs to see along those kinds of differences too.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I just want to focus on one or two. I think it's very difficult to predict Trump. There was a comment before that he's like ping pong, his mind changes and we have to wait for it. But so it's easier when he is president and to look at what his policies are. But I think basing on what statements that have been made, etc., by Trump and all that, I think there is going to be a keener competition with China. That is very important for Trump in order to protect America's interests. And they have talked about increasing tariffs. This has already happened, of course, is in fact at very, to me, quite crazy levels, increasing tariffs. But probably, I think Trump, again, make America great again, the domestic economy, employment for the people, etc. He is going to be quite strong on China. That's one. Number two, I think I agree with Prof. Rajarasya. On the security part, we don't know, Trump may be very different. For instance, in Trump 1, he came very close to having peace agreement with North Korea, which alarmed some people because they don't want peace with North Korea. It's good to keep things, boiling. So Trump almost did, his first meeting in Korea across the thing, second meeting in Singapore and in Vietnam, Hanoi. Things were all developing towards an agreement between the US and North Korea until it was scuttled. Who scuttled it? we can speculate. But I think we should not, because Trump is business, transactional, he can be quite different. So we must be prepared for some surprises. Thank you.
I think I'll take the some of the geopolitics there, but I think the question around Mexico is interesting. I think there's a lot of expansion of businesses coming into different countries and expanding into different countries so that they can access the US market. And Mexico is certainly, as Mr. O said, yes, there was a sucking sound before into Mexico, but there's also been a rush to get into Mexico so that it can actually participate in what was NAFTA, but now is the USMCA. Trump has vowed to relook at that agreement. It is coming up for a renegotiation next year. And so it'll be very interesting to see how Mexico and Canada, to the extent, how that agreement is reorganized, and what it does, and whether or not it is a source of strength or it's a source of concern for the companies that have rejigged their supply chain to use Mexico as a jump off into the United States. And don't forget, while the US is outside of the CPTPP, these countries are not. Okay, so Malaysia is part of CPTPP, so it can locate its businesses and interact with Chile, Peru, and be able to take advantage of those trade agreements, the Latin American trade agreements, into the United States. So I think we have to watch the space of free trade agreements and what's going on there. The opportunities are challenging as much as they are attractive, and we need to be able to be smart about the choices. Again, U.S. value chains. If you want to be a customer, if you want to be a supplier into the U.S. value chains, then you're going to have to obey what the customer wants and be able to comply with what the customer that customer base is. And whether if you choose to have a customer in South Africa, then those are the rules you're going to engage with. If you're going to choose to have a customer in the United States, then compliance and being able to report, be transparent, be able to track your supply chain, and whether or not the environment, the social policies make a difference, we'll have to wait and see. I think I agree that they may take a backseat, but for the government maybe, but for consumers, will they? Will the consumer still demand something different? And if the consumer, who ultimately is the purchaser, if they want an economically or environmentally sound product, they are going to put that onus of demand on that supply chain. So Mexico, I think, will be very interesting to see how it plays in free trade zones, in the free trade agreements.
Yeah, thank you, Ratu. I think Tantri made a very interesting comment about Trump 2.1, Trump 1.0 and North Korea. You see, Trump is quite unpredictable. He has also said very recently during his election campaign regarding Taiwan, he made a remark that if China really is going to go in and take Taiwan, he said he won't do anything. He has asked Taiwan to pay more for Taiwan's defense. So this is something to watch, whether China might actually make a move into Taiwan and to see whether Trump will react or not. And if Trump doesn't, perhaps then that will be an improvement in US-China relations in this part of the world. But it is really something to watch about Trump. He is quite unpredictable. Transactional president, yes. So if Taiwan buys more weapons from the US, perhaps he will be willing to protect it. But if Taiwan relies too much on the United States for protection, Trump will say the same thing as he said to the European allies. If Russia invades you, we don't care. I'm not going to do anything. You guys don't want to pay for defense, and we can't carry 100% of the burden defending Europe. So that is Trump, yeah? Okay, let's go to round 2 now. Mr. O.A.
Just briefly, Mexico, I think, would encounter a lot of headwinds from a Trump administration. Already, I think there's this Chinese-built port in Peru, which was just opened by Xi Jinping. And already, I think the Trump team has said something to the effect that those goods coming out of that port would be considered Chinese goods, and thereby high tariffs are going to be imposed upon them. So even withdrawal from NAFTA or its successors, I think would be possible under Trump administration. On Israel, number one, Israel's war with many of its neighbors. I think, well, many Arab countries, Saudi Arabia included, well, the atrocities aside, geopolitically and geostrategically, they may not be not happy about, let's say, Hamas, let's say, Hezbollah being, being destroyed by Israel. And I think the normalization of ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel, I think is still undergoing. And if indeed they normalize their ties, other Islamic countries will have to follow because that's Saudi Arabia. And also regarding oil prices and so on, I think Trump's answer would be, yeah, welcome to buy U.S. oil and so on. All these current initiatives being put forth by, let's say, the Biden administration, I think they'll be politely neglected under the Trump administration. Southeast Asia, again, politely neglected unless you are going to have some sort of big investment into the United States. Then you might be treated to the White House, and Trump will come to your groundbreaking ceremony and so on, as he did to, I think if I remember correctly, some Taiwanese semiconductor companies and tycoons. And talking about tycoons, Elon Musk, right? Number one, let's see how long this bromance can, I think they call it bromance, right? Can last, huh? Because Trump is infamously quick changing in his mindset. Huh? And number two, but I think Trump does have a liking for this, shall we say, other dictators. Huh? So he already befriended what's his name, Kim Jong-un before, and Putin is his good friend. So anything is possible, as Tan Sri said. Even normalization of ties between the U.S. and China again, if Trump decides to be chummy up to Xi Jinping again, and provided those trade balances are, well, shall we say, balanced, yeah.
Okay, we go to round two. Perhaps we can have 3 more questions and comments before we wind up the session. Yes.
Afternoon, my name is Sohaimi. I'm a retiree pretty much. Well, I'd like to say 2 things about Donald Trump personality. I think many of you here have heard about the Trump shuffle or the dance. If you have been watching American football, basketball, they have been doing that. And they love Donald Trump's shuffle. Number 2. Sorry, my handphone keeps on failing me. Trump 1.0, right? I mean, he did what he did, but in 2.0, he can go to 2 different extremes. One is where he wants to improve himself for his failures in 1.0, right? But he can also the other extreme, whereby he wants to do everything to the extreme, right? And I don't think that is Trump 3.0. So, knowing this guy, unpredictable, uncertain, so he can go the other extreme, and God knows what is going to happen to the global world. Okay, that's about Trump's character. Now, the reality is this: for this 2.0, Trump feel emboldened because the Senate, the Congress, the Supreme Court, and I think the judiciary which he's going to appoint will all be his people, right? And mind you, the only guy who's not with him is the Fed governor. And I'm not sure when at this point, when will his term expire? And if it comes so soon, mind you, he will replace the current Fed governor. Now, then my 2 questions is this. One is about, nobody has talked about India's role. And I think it's very important to consider India as opposed to Mexico or Peru or whatsoever, right? Because they are part and parcel, and which relates to my question on BRIC currency. Because if these 2, India and China, were really, really strong and committed towards BRIC currency, and I think, it's good for Malaysia in one way, but I don't think Malaysia will go very deep into such venture. Thank you.
Okay, one more question or comment, if there is one.
Hi, my name is Hasna. I'm from newmalaysiaherald.com. Curious, Malaysia's participation in BRICS, will that have a bearing on Malaysia-US relations in the future? That's all.
Okay, any other question? Yeah, one more there. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Aizat, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my name is Haiza. I am a student of AEI. So I have just like a follow up for Datuk Subhan's explanation just now about the tariff challenge, right? Where one of Trump's agenda is to raise up tariff against the Chinese government, where he mentioned that to raise up until 40% of tariff due to his America First agenda. So I would like to add up that according to the World Bank, how it's greatly affected China when in terms it is being executed is that 1% decrease of China's GDP will affected 0.8% of Malaysian GDP due to the fact that Malaysia is greatly benefit with the Chinese import-export activity. So my question is that while we know that right now our Prime Minister are really keen towards joining BRICS, the issues of de-dollarization, strengthening of the global south, should we concern that Trump's agenda on creating tariff to China we also greatly affected the Malaysia's trade activity as well, especially with both China, Malaysia, and also US, Malaysia as well. Because right now I'm seeing that Prime Minister Anwar is really keen on the Chinese side rather than the American side. Thank you.
Okay, let me see if I can get the tariffs one. That's an interesting one. The tariffs are going to definitely impact Chinese trade. It's 60%, not 40%. 60% is what he's promised, and 10% across the board to everybody else. Potentially 20%. Okay. Will Malaysia be impacted? Absolutely. We're part of both supply chains, and so therefore there is going to be an impact. The question is how much of the trade is, I'm not an economist, so I can't talk to the GDP numbers, but Malaysia's trade is not necessarily all based going to the United States. People, certainly people, businesses that have invested in Malaysia are exporting to the rest of the world. So, the great thing about diversification is that you do have other markets. But so can Malaysia weather this, what's coming down, and ensure that there is a balance so that Malaysia can still be strong in the supply chain? Okay, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't think any of us here are going to be able to say what exactly that impact is. But we need to be very cognizant of it. We need to be watching it and to see which industries are going to be impacted more or less. Now, don't forget, Malaysia's trade with the United States, a lot of it is intermediary. It's not finished goods. Okay, the semiconductor trade is US trade with US companies, back and forth. So will those industries be able to negotiate outside of the tariffs, to be outside the tariffs? That's something that US industry is going to have to look at and whether or not it can do. So it really depends on where the tariffs are going to hit. If it's going to hit Malaysian furniture, yeah, maybe you'll get the 10%. But there's a lot, the bulk of the trade is sitting in the electronics space, chemicals, and machine.
Yeah, I think one needs to look at it from a bigger picture. If you look at Mexico as an example to start with, I remember being in Guadalajara in the state of Jalisco, Mexico, when IBM was taken over by Lenovo, the computer company. I think that it's a lot more complex than just saying Chinese exports tariff hopping somewhere and getting to the US. It's just like now we know over the last year, Chinese exports to Brazil, I think, increased by 15% under BRICS, by 15%. Of course, when it comes to BRICS, Argentina rejected. Invited to be a member, Argentina rejected. Saudi Arabia is still playing a game. not sure whether they're on, they're on the fence. For one moment, they're not rejecting it, but they haven't. They went on the last day to Kazan, the 2024 meeting in Russia, hosted by Putin. But my feeling is it's just like the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009 here in the US is 2007, 2008. That led to China actually extending the entire build-up of the whole of China, highways, railways, and so on. So even if you go to a remote part of China, you will see modern highways there, a way to use its excess capacity on steel and so on. But they have also expanded subsequently Belt and Road initiatives, which has led to infrastructure largely, development in a number of places. And most of the time, the places that they erupted linked to corruption and so on has nothing to do with China, though. It's the national government that needs to be blamed. Now, coming back to BRICS, you have to understand, I think BRICS is prevailing in the current government largely because of the pursuit of ZOPFAN, Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality, that was mooted by Tun Razak. Simply means that we don't believe in having superpowers. We want to take a stand that we want an egalitarian world, a world that gets into a peaceful situation. BRICS does not get involved in domestic affairs, not that I'm in support of it. So if something happens in Myanmar, BRIC guys don't speak about it. We here, in fact, I learned a new term yesterday, constructive intervention from my former minister here, Tan Sri Said Alba. But the fact that I mentioned this point started by Sukarno first, 1955 Bandung Conference, formalized with the one in Tito handled in Belgrade in 1961. That's the spirit that many middle powers are looking at, a normative way of looking at things so that we don't stand with a superpower because we want to see that we are safe. I think that seems to be the approach of some of the countries, but Malaysia has taken a position. If the political leadership wants it that way, then that is it. Joining BRICS, I think, is not a problem. But one needs to also look at it. You were talking about de-dollarization. I don't see it as an attempt deliberately to undermine the dollar. It's an attempt forced upon Russia, for example. When trade sanctions were imposed, the ruble was totally irrelevant. I remember Biden telling, he will turn the ruble into rubble. Yeah, Biden said that. Now, what do you expect Russia to do? And therefore, it's not a deliberate attempt to de-dollarize. It's not a deliberate attempt. But there's been lots of transactions handled largely in the yuan, in the Chinese yuan, but also in the rupee. The oil exports from Russia to India is paid by Indian rupee. Now, I believe alternative systems will emerge, but in my own understanding is beyond simply trade. Remember that Malaysia still, at the moment, exports a lot more to China than it does to the US, even after the geopolitical tensions that erupted and is going on unrelented. But it's still, China is still the main market for Malaysia. So if you're concerned for that, and China is an important player within BRICS. Now, all I'm saying here is, if countries are interested in a world order that doesn't have, I would say there are three superpowers now. You have a nuclear war, I think the world is gone because of the three countries that are heavily equipped with nuclear bombs. Now, if that's what you want, then we'll see the end of us. Now, I think that the initiative taken by the government is one that simply puts us in a good pedestal, rather than making us selfish in a way where, because we value exports to a particular country. Even so, it's no longer true, though, because China is the main market now. Thank you.
Quick comment.
Yeah, I have this friend from Hong Kong, and whenever she comes over, I would treat her to dinner because she's a reality check for me. Because you know, Hong Kong people very pragmatic, very ruthless, right? So the conversation somehow turned to BRICS, and immediately, without a wink, she said, "Oh, you mean that grouping of beggar countries, mostly beggar countries?" I know this is very offensive, but I have to say it. This is how a lot of people look at BRICS. These are countries lining up to try to get some goodies from China. And well, if China likes to have BRICS, therefore they would join BRICS, and therefore they would try to get those goodies. I think in order for, let's say, all these renminbi to replace US dollars and so on, number one, the BRICS member states, they would have to sort of sort out among themselves. They should have some concerted opinions on this. China and India, for example, they are not friends. And even nowadays, China and Russia, I don't know, it's a bit iffy whether they're real friends. So number one, whether you have a concerted stance, and number two, whether your own people like your own money or they like the US dollars. I mean, you ask all my China friends, they love US dollars. They try to transfer the assets out of China, even to Malaysia, not to mention Singapore, all these family offices, right? So as long as your own people like the US dollars, how are you going to use your currency to replace the US dollars?
Okay, thank you, Mr. O. So we almost are coming to the end, but I shall not attempt to summarize the comments, insightful presentations by our panel speakers, but I would like to remind you of our topic. The discussion today is not just only on Malaysia, but also the US Trump 2.0 and its relationship to ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific region. So we must say a little bit more about ASEAN, because ASEAN is the anchor of stability in this region. And how do we understand the dynamics of ASEAN? Very important, because we have all these external powers relating to ASEAN and wanting ASEAN to continue. So how do we capture the essence of ASEAN? So I have decided to use an analogy of the ASEAN bus. The ASEAN bus has started and it is beginning to move. The driver is driving the bus, and in the front seat, we have the ASEAN members. They're all seated in front. And in the back seat, right at the back, are all the dialogue partners. They're all moving and they're all enjoying the ride because it is safe. But they also know, all of them, the driver, the ASEAN members, and also the dialogue partners, they all know that this bus is driving to nowhere. But they are safe. They feel very safe. So what happens is, they are all going, and then after traveling several thousand kilometers, the tires of the ASEAN bus give way. The tires need to be changed. So immediately the EU steps in, changes the tires, and provides for the maintenance of the bus. The bus moves on. And our dialogue partner, a very principal dialogue partner, the United States, also comes forward to provide insurance on the bus and also renews the insurance to ensure the vehicle's stability and security. So after some years, of course, due to planned obsolescence, the bus completely breaks down. So the bus has to be replaced. Two other dialogue partners step forward, one to supply a new bus and the other to provide the credit. ASEAN looks at India. India offers the Tata bus. You see, the Tata bus is very well known for its sturdiness and strength and balance. And the Tata bus, you see, one of its strongest points, I would say an outstanding feature of the Tata bus, because it's a heavy duty bus. An outstanding feature of the Tata bus is that it can take passengers inside the bus. It can also take passengers on the rooftop. And still, it can maintain its equilibrium. So the ASEAN bus is fantastic. And then who pays for the ASEAN bus? Here comes China. Rising China provides a very handsome loan to ASEAN. The ASEAN members accept it. They pay their monthly installments to service the loan. This, in essence, is the ASEAN story. Now there's a final sequel to this wonder called ASEAN. Come January 2025, Malaysia becomes the chair of ASEAN, assumes the ASEAN chairmanship. So here we have our Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim with all his gusto and enthusiasm to reform the nation, the region, and the world, steps into the ASEAN bus, sits in the driver's seat. The first thing he notices is that three essential gadgets are missing: the speedometer, the accelerator, and the brakes. All are not there. Then he looks around and then discovers that all these gadgets have been fitted behind the driver's seat where the ASEAN members are sitting. So apparently, the assembly plant for this special bus is in Jakarta, the headquarters of ASEAN. So Prime Minister Anwar looks at them and they all greet him with a very reassuring smile. So Anwar gets back to his seat, he reflects and he said, hey, the bus that he is driving, he realizes, is not an ordinary bus. It is a consensus bus. And therefore, there can be no radical departures. So he resigns himself to the fact that this is the ASEAN way and it is business as usual. So ladies and gentlemen, we almost have come to the end of proceedings. And before we bring this session to a happy close, let me thank all our panelists here, our very eminent panelists, Tan Sri Jawahar Hassan, Dato Shivon Das, Professor Raja Rasaya, and also Mr. Oh Aisan for their wonderful presentations. Let's give them a hand. Secondly, I would also like to thank our cooperating partners because MAAS is the organizer of this conference. I would like to thank our cooperating partners, Asia Europe Institute, and also AUAM for co-hosting this function. Let's give them a hand as well. I would also like to thank our AEI administrative staff for their organizational support, and especially Mr. Zahardin Omar. Where is he? Is he here? Mr. Zahardin Omar has worked tirelessly to ensure that all our technical facilities are in good order. Big hand for Zahardin. And I must also not forget to thank our MC for this evening, Ms. Chin Shi Ke, for her kind assistance. So ladies and gentlemen, on that note, let me conclude. And before we break up for this evening, I will turn over the mic to Ms. Chin Shi Ke for final announcements.
Thank you very much, Professor Naden, and all the panelists for the very insightful and interesting session today. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, may I please invite the organizing chairperson of this forum and president of MAAS, Professor Dr. K.S. Naden, to present a token of appreciation to our four panelists today. Firstly, to distinguished Professor Dr. Raja Rasaya. Secondly, to Tan Sri Muhammad Jawahar Hassan. Next, to Datuk Shivon Das. And lastly, to Mr. Oh Aisan. Thank you very much, Professor Naden. Can the chairman and the four panelists please remain on stage for a group photo We would also like to invite Mr. Ng Ye Chen up on the stage for this, please. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we would also like to take a group photo with the audience. So we invite you to please stand for this photo. Dear audience, please move closer towards the middle for this group photo, please.